We have Olivia and Judah here. Olivia wrote the New York Times best-selling book called Charisma Myth. If you haven't read it, it's amazing. And Judah works for Berkeley's Haas Business School and also works at Stardex. And they recently wrote a book called The Net and the Butterfly to help you work on your creative process. So without any further ado, let's welcome them to Google.
Thank you. So when we started doing research for this book, we came upon this really wild pattern. And so this is Leo Szilard. He went to a lecture in the late 30s about nuclear physics. And as he was walking across the street, literally in mid-stride, he had this realization about how he could start a nuclear chain reaction using fission. Then we get Henri Poincaré. How'd I do?
Henri Poincaré.
Olivia's native French speaker, so every time I come upon a French word, it's a nightmare.
It kills me.
So, he was working on an incredibly difficult series of math functions, and one morning, as he was getting on a bus to go to a conference, he remembers this very distinctly. He put his foot on the step, the first step of the bus, and suddenly, it came to him. He knew what his answer was. So then we come to Nikola Tesla, who's trying to work on a functioning alternating current generator. He's walking through a park with his friends when suddenly, he realizes exactly how he's going to do it. He needs one of the engines to rotate in the opposite direction from the other two that is going to be part of the generator. This also brings us to Heisenberg. Sorry, for those of you who are fans, if you now type Heisenberg into the Google search engine, that's what you get. He has now eclipsed Werner. Walter has eclipsed Werner. Werner Heisenberg has a conversation with Niels Bohr in Copenhagen late night. Walking home through a park, what happens? He's like, can the universe really be as strange as I think it is? He comes up with the uncertainty principle. This just keeps happening. Gödel and Einstein, famous for taking walks together in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study. Darwin had something called the sand walk. What he would do is he would start at the corner there, and he'd put a couple of stones. He'd stack them, and he'd walk the sand walk while he thought about the problem, and he'd knock a stone off every lap. And he knew, he's like, this is a 3-stone problem. This is a 6-stone problem. But he would walk his way to the answer. Same thing with Tchaikovsky, 3-hour walks every afternoon. And then we get Immanuel Kant, who had said you could set your watch by his walks, because he'd walk around the town square the same time every day. You keep going back in history, it keeps showing up. Aristotle, who founded a school, and they were known as the Peripatetics. Why? Because they walked around as they philosophized. And then, of course, we have the famous story of Archimedes, who's stepping into the tub, watches the water displacement, and suddenly realizes, this is how I'm going to figure out if the crown is solid gold or not, by checking its density. Something very strange is going on that this story keeps happening over and over, and it's not just with walking, it happens with sleep. So this is Dmitry Mendeleev, who spent 3 years working on a chemistry textbook, driven crazy that he couldn't put it into more order, and during a feverish nap, woke up with a picture of this in his head. Wrote it down as fast as he could. Who's our next? Oh, you're going to hate me again. August. Are you going to make me do it?
Go.
Kukule? How'd I do? No? Nightmare?
It's fine.
We're moving on.
Yeah.
So, chemist, German chemist, 1800s. Everybody's trying to figure out the shape of benzene at the time. Nobody can do it. He has a dream of a snake eating its own tail and suddenly realizes that benzene is a ring. This literally creates structural organic chemistry, which creates the tar and dye industries. It creates the pharmaceutical industries. If you ever wondered why so many pharmaceutical companies are German, it's because he was German and started his first lab in Bonn. Ramanujan, famous numbers theorist from India, used to say that the goddess would write the equations on his tongue in his dreams, and so he'd wake up with stuff like this. Finally, Salvador Dali. Now, he knew exactly what he was doing with sleep. He would sit down in a straight-back chair, and he would hang his arm over the side holding a metal key with a metal plate underneath. And as he dozed off, he would drop the key, and the key would hit the plate, make a rattle, wake him up, and as soon as he woke up, he'd start drawing. And we all know what those drawings ended up looking like. So here we have all of these geniuses who are accessing walking and sleeping in different ways to come up with these amazing breakthroughs. What is it that they figured out? What did they know? And as another example, I want to tell you that when I was showering this morning, thinking about this talk coming here, I suddenly realized I wanted to show you all this. to come back to that. I'm going to tell you why I wanted to show you that in a minute. It's not just because it's really funny, which it is. We have the capacity to know so much. When we look up at the stars, we're amazed at how many stars there are. We're amazed at the sheer immensity of the universe and our place in it. But the reality is that when we look up at the sky, that's how much we're actually seeing. We are not truly aware of how much is out there. We're not truly aware of how much more we could see. And the same is true of how we access our own brains. We are not aware of just how much we have the capacity to do. And what we wrote about in this book is not only what is this physical mechanism inside everyone's brains, and I want to be clear, it's everyone's. It's not just geniuses. The geniuses have the same exact physical structures in their brain that every one of you has. But it's a question of accessing it. It's a question of trusting it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a lot about tools. Because the thing about breakthroughs, creativity, innovation, is there are a lot of theories. And people will lay out theories all the time. But this is a craft. This is like an artisan's craft. And just like artisans, there are tools. And you have to practice with those tools in order to gain mastery. And that's really what we were interested in this book. So to explain what the process is in your brain, we made a short animation that we want to show you. And the story we're going to tell you is true, and everything going on inside the brain is also true. Florida, 1965. The Rolling Stones are on their first US tour, but they're not the Rolling Stones yet. They're about as popular as Herman's Hermits. What they're in need of is a breakthrough hit, a #1 song, and no one knows it more than Keith Richards. One night in his motel room, Richards was trying to write that song. So what's going on inside his brain when he's attempting to have this breakthrough? This is the executive of Keith Richards' brain. It's focused, on task, and has a goal: write a hit song. There's just one problem. It's not very good at breakthroughs by itself. See, the executive network is great when you need to make a list or complete a project. But when it comes to having a breakthrough, it needs some help. That night, Richards fell asleep. And no longer on task, his executive went to talk to another network that lies deeper in the brain. Now, what we're about to show you is not unique to Keith Richards. You have the same exact room in your brain. We all do. We just don't access it enough. This is your Genius Lounge. About 10 different brain regions in here, all hanging out talking. There's Mozart, Leonardo da Vinci, Marie Curie, Einstein. Welcome to the part of your brain that's working on stuff when you don't think you're working on stuff. That night, Richards' executive walked in and said, "Quiet! All right, everyone, we need a breakthrough hit. Now go." The executive went and busied itself with something mindless. In this case, sleep, but it can be doing the dishes or the laundry or taking a shower. Meanwhile, the geniuses started sharing all kinds of information, from art to music to childhood memories. This was the sum total of Keith Richards' experience and knowledge, and the combining created his intuition. It created a breakthrough. Richards woke up in the middle of the night and began to play. That was how the Rolling Stones got their breakthrough hit, Satisfaction. But it is not just Keith Richards. We all have an executive and a Genius Lounge in our brains. The key to having more breakthroughs is learning how to switch between the two modes. All right, that was me doing the voice work, and I'm going to pick that up as a second job, if I can. That literally is what happens in your brain when you have a breakthrough. That is literally where you go when you're more creative. I'm sure all of you have had moments when you were on a run, when you were just spacing out during a walk, when you were in the shower, and suddenly you just realize something. And the reason it works is because your executive mode, the part in the front of your brain that takes care of everything, that gets you places on time, that finishes projects, it has to go quiet. But it doesn't just go quiet if you tell it to. It gets annoyed if you do that. So you have to fake it out. You have to give it a goal. We're going to walk to the store. Now the executive's happy. We're going to finish the dishes. We're going to take a shower. The executive's like, great, I have something I'm going to finish. Thank goodness. I'm so happy this is the case. And it's but it's kind of mindless, right? You don't have to concentrate hard on it.
Judah?
Yes?
If you're wondering what we mean by if you tell the executive to go quiet, it gets annoyed, how many of you have tried meditation? Right? How many of you have experienced the monkey mind? Exactly. So you know what we're talking about. That's what happens when you try to tell the executive to go quiet. You're welcome.
And so, but if you give it this kind of mindless task, what happens is power, literally power, reroutes from the executive and goes to this Genius Lounge, this default mode network. And it's like the espresso machine gets fired up, and all the different parts of the network start drinking coffee. And they start getting jazzed. And the different parts of this network, they encompass so many various parts. You have your own personal memories. You have your error prediction and your future prediction. You have your sense of empathy, trying to figure out how somebody else is feeling. You have your own sense of self, your meta-narrative that's moving through this. You have your inferior parietal lobes, which is all the physical sensation coming into you. It goes on, the sheer number of things that this network is engaged in. And what it does when you're on some sort of random little task is it starts mixing and matching information. It starts playing around as if you had a pile of Legos, and it's just making all these Legos together and then holding them up and saying, is this a brilliant idea? Is this a brilliant idea? Now, one of the keys to this is that it's not that the executive plays no role. As you saw in the video, the geniuses keep looking to the executive. They're like, hey, we came up with this. What do you think? The executive is actually saying yes or no. And so at some point, your geniuses come up with something really good. Your executive says yes, and that's when it enters your level of awareness. That's your aha moment. Now, the science kind of stops at the moment at how does your brain determine what's a good idea and what's not a good idea? How does it know to wake you up? We don't know yet. But we do know that this is what's happening. And there are certain things that we all can do to capitalize on this natural ability. And the first one is plasticity. So the reason I showed you this video was for a very specific reason. I'll show it to you again. Watch the defense. Right? The defense just stands there. They just look at the quarterback dumbfounded. And the reason it works is because what's happening is not within their realm of what's possible. They don't notice it. They don't expect it. And so they can't think of what to do. He literally has the ball and is walking by 7 people who could tackle him at any moment, and nobody moves because they can't put it together. That is what plasticity allows us to do. Brain plasticity is our ability to build new neural connections, to understand new thoughts. To give you an idea of what plasticity is, I want to show you this. So this is a video by Drew Berry, who does amazing biological animations. Highly recommend you go check out his stuff. It's brilliant. And here he's got a single neuron. And what you're watching happen is the axon, or the soma, or the body, the big bulb there, is what's sort of giving out pulses of electricity. There's new research out actually that it's not just the body that does that, but we don't need to get into that right now. And we're moving along to the dendrites. These are the parts of the brain that just branch out like a river, the parts of the neurons that just go out and out and out. And along them you have these little heads, these little buds. And on the top of these buds, that's where you have neurotransmitter receptors, the places that accept things like serotonin, dopamine, neuroepinephrine. The thing you need to realize is this is not a static situation. What you're seeing right here is you're watching a new neurotransmitter receptor be born for the first time. And now all of a sudden, there's a new way for the neurons to connect to one another. And because there's a new way for them to connect to one another, there's a new thought that can happen. Because that's one of the most important things for you to understand. Your thoughts are not chemical. Your thoughts are not electrical. Your thoughts are structural. Your brain is literally building new neurotransmitter receptors every millisecond. And in doing that, you have the ability to build new connections, and having the ability to build new connections gives you the ability to have a new thought. Basically, messenger RNA sends a message to transfer RNA. This is transfer RNA. Look at the very top. You see the ACC? Those are amino acids. This little factory stacks amino acids, one on top of the other, and then when it's done, it cuts them off, and then this amazing magical thing happens. The protein folds. I'm sure you've heard of this. In this case, and what we're talking about, these proteins fold and form new neurotransmitter receptors. So it's our ability to do that that makes us plastic. Your brain is structural. You're building the actual infrastructure to have a new thought. And so one of the first things that you all have to get better at, that everyone has to get better at, is getting more practiced at doing this. So people who tell themselves, I'm not creative, I don't think of these things, I'm not that sort of person, that is equivalent to sitting on the couch for 2 years, and then somebody tells you to do 10 push-ups and you can't, and you say, I guess I'm just weak now. I'm just forever out of shape. It's hopeless. Now, you know that's not the case. You know you just need to work out and get fit. The same is true about your own ability to have a breakthrough, about your own ability to be creative. We have become neuro couch potatoes. We do the same things over and over, and when we do the same things over and over, we don't challenge our brains to build new neurotransmitter receptors, which means we can't build a new thought. And that's why we get stuck. That's why many of us end up like the defense on that team. Something new has happened, and we can't process it. We don't know what it is, and it walks by us. This is what it's like when you lack neuroplasticity, but you're trying to come up with a new thought. And there are tools that can help you actually get to something that's more like this. And so that's what this is really about, is the tools. It's about changing your neurons from this to this. You want all those branches. You want all that connectivity. That's what you're looking for. What do you think this is? Don't be shy. You have no way of knowing, so just shout stuff out. Paint? Fabric? See that? Feel that push? Feel that push? That's like trying to do a push-up when you're out of shape. Smoke?
Colored liquid.
Colored liquid?
Turbulence.
Turbulence?
Mold.
What was it?
Mold.
Mold. So this is ink drops in water. And you were getting there. You were all in and around it. But now that I've told you it's ink drops in water, you're looking at it again, and your brain is actually forming a new set of neural connections to make that into a memory, to understand that that's what that is. You've broken open into a new space. Exposing ourselves to things we don't know, to things we don't understand, to things we don't see a lot, that is literally one of the greatest ways to create neuroplasticity. This is one of our favorites, Eric Weinenmeyer. Okay, you let it go. He has climbed the 7 tallest mountains on all 7 continents. There's just one funny thing, as if that weren't enough. He's blind. So how does he do this? How does he possibly climb this mountain? Something called the brain port. See this little thing? He puts that on his tongue. Then it is connected to these glasses where you see a camera on the front. The camera takes in the light signals, and it becomes electrical impulses that are signaled to his tongue. The tongue signals those into his brain. Because the person who invented this, Paul Baccarita, said, we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains. Our eyes just happen to take in the light. But if we can figure out another way to take in the light signals, our brains will figure out a way to see, because our brains are so plastic. Because we can create so many new connections. And little by little, he learned to read the signals from his tongue, and he could actually start to see, even though there was nothing coming through his eyes. Another story we love is a young woman in China, 24 years old, walks into the hospital kind of dizzy. They do a CAT scan. She has no cerebellum. She was born without one. It was full of liquid in her head. She shouldn't have been able to ever walk, much less hold down a job function. But the other parts of her brain started to take on these other abilities. Our ability to be plastic is almost never ending. It's astounding. We just need to actually work the muscle. And it's incredibly important that we work the muscle. A number of things that we like to suggest. Come to work one day dressed completely differently than you ever do. If you're a dress down sort of person, like I am, wear a suit and a tie, fancy shoes. First of all, the fabric will move against you differently, and it will give different physical impulses to your brain, which goes right into your default network. The other thing that will happen is people will respond to you differently. You're going to get a whole different set of information from people as they react in these different ways. And you're just gonna take this all in. If you're a woman and you tend to wear heels and dresses, wear pants and a pair of sneakers, or vice versa on both the men and the women. Just change it up. Another one that I like to do is borrow somebody else's playlist that you don't know what it is and just listen to it for the day. Just the songs that come up, the way they make you feel, what you're experiencing with it. We like to talk about eating things you ordinarily never eat because the brain signals are new. You have to sort of process, what is this new thing? This one is really difficult, especially given the political situation right now, but read political magazines you ordinarily wouldn't read, listen to talk radio you ordinarily wouldn't talk to. It might not be worth it from the stress level, and we understand that, but it's another way of just taking in totally different information. Or watch movies you would never watch. Read a book you would never read. Get into a conversation with someone you'd never get into a conversation to, and just take in things that are brand new. When you go to home tonight, take a completely different route if you can. And just notice what's new. Notice what's different. Change up your routine. Routine is the death of plasticity. You're wanting to just change it up and see what's going on. See what you can bring in that's new. Right? I suggest all of you go and visit Olivia if you can and hang out with her chickens and her bees because you probably don't do that very often. And watching chickens is actually kind of fascinating. They call it chicken TV. And you can just watch them, but they behave in a way you just don't notice, you just don't see. This is one of the reasons you feel more alive when you go on vacation, because everything's new. And it's popping in your brain. When the plasticity is going, you feel it. It fundamentally feels good and feels different. Another piece about this is new information. You want to take in things you ordinarily would never hear about, would never see, would never do. So try a sport you've never tried. If you're more physically oriented, ride a dirt bike, go mountain biking in Moab, go on a trapeze. Be careful, I once hurt myself terribly on a trapeze. But take in all of these different pieces because the physical reality that you engage in is going straight into your default network, and it's causing all kinds of new things to pop. But one of the reasons new information is so incredibly important is because there's this other element to the way that our default network works, and we couldn't get into it in the animation because it was a little too complex. But here's what happens. Right now you're paying attention to me, or at least I hope you're paying attention to me. And you're creating memories in your brain. And what your hippocampus does, which is what's in charge of creating your memories, is it takes all this information and kind of puts it on a shelf, and it waits to encode it as longer-term memories. And then, when you're off task, when you're not really focused, your hippocampus starts to form these memories. Meanwhile, you're off task, so your default network is also activated. All of a sudden, your hippocampus does a very strange thing. It takes random shards and combinations of these new memories, and it throws them like little sparks into your default network. So your default network has all this information, kind of like building a fire, and then your hippocampus throws new information in as a spark to light it. So if you don't have new information, your default network, your Genius Lounge, just keeps spinning on the same stuff. It can't really bust through to something new. This is one of the reasons very often people who have breakthroughs do their work and then also have some kind of hobby. They have something else they're really interested in because that brings in the new information. That starts getting things to bang into each other in new and novel ways, in ways they weren't expecting. So if all you do is work, it's going to be that much harder to have that creative breakthrough because you want to bring that new information in from somewhere else, from something else, something that's just different. So how do you access it? How do you actually get into this mode?
Judah, if I can step in for a
Please.
second. One of the ways that we like to explain the importance of plasticity is if you look at a martial artist, so say someone who's doing an actual useful martial arts like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and not some sissy practice like karate, you know that I'm slightly biased, you know that there's one thing that is the actual techniques. What are the moves? How can you roll? And then something completely different, which is the physical conditioning. Plasticity is like doing cardio. The plasticity on its own isn't necessarily the exercise for plasticity isn't necessarily the one that'll lead you to breakthrough. Just like having a lot more physical power won't necessarily get you to win on the mat. I was regularly tied into knots by my sensei, who was a shrimp, who was about this big, right? He could take on an 85-kilo guy without a problem. But it's part of what will make you better at the final result. So the same way you do cardio, regardless of which end sport you're going to do, you want to get better at plasticity because it's a good conditioning to then use the breakthrough tools. Am I making any sense? Yeah. Please, please, please jump in, ask questions. If you have objections, raise them. We really encourage the debate in the moment. There might or might not be a Q&A period at the end, so take advantage of it. All yours.
Objections?
Can you repeat his question?
Yes. So the question was, what are good contrasts in terms of your work versus a hobby? What are good ways to create that differentiation so that you get the most out of the new information to get the novel ideas? And so there are two things going on in your question. Some of the things you suggested go to what we have up here, which is accessing. So sleep, walking, these are less hobbies, although I like to think of sleep as a hobby. That's a great idea. But these are less hobbies, and they're more ways to access your network. There are doorways into that sort of mindless state where you're sort of floating and you're not paying too much attention to anything. Then there's an actual hobby where you are focused. So actual hobbies can be anything. Woodworking is great. Watching movies is great. Or reading books. Cooking, rock climbing, cycling. It doesn't really matter. Collecting stamps. Yes?
I have an objection. Personally, I've always found that things that are wordless are better for the mind wandering. So for example, when you watch a movie, even if it's a movie that you know really well, the verbal center, processing center of your brain is still active. Whereas if you're rock climbing, if you're beekeeping, you're usually berating yourself for the many mistakes you've just done. But if you're climbing, if you're running without music, in my experience, that just works better because of the lack of distraction from the verbal processor.
And just to be clear, there's no absolute answers to these things. You find your own way. Because I would turn around and say, my mind will wander very often when I'm reading. You ever read the same paragraph over and over, and then you're like, oh, I keep reading the same paragraph? It's because you've mind wandered. So for some people, absolutely, the verbal processor completely gets in the way. For other people, it just it can shut down. So you're just looking for what works for you and what interests you, because you don't want it to be a force. You want it to be something that you actually like, but the key is to give it time. Give yourself time to truly do it. Give yourself time to truly learn about it, because that's going to create new and different information that can then combine with the work you're doing to show you novel, new possibilities. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
You got it. And so to continue, oh yes, please.
How does meditation fit into all this?
Oh, the meditation question. Excellent question. I'll start, then you
Go.
Okay.
We debated in the book just how deep to get into this because, no, seriously, there are some dark sides to many practices of meditation, and so.
So meditation, ironically, you would think meditation would put you into that kind of state. However, the majority of meditation practices actually quiet your default network. They actually make it happen less. One of the reasons is because there's a part of your default network that is all about your meta-awareness. So it's all about, what do I think about myself? You ever get caught in a loop thinking bad thoughts about yourself? That's your default network. This is one of the reasons depression and creativity get connected very often, because it's the same network in your brain responsible for both. So, and meditation quiets that network. It can help you with depression. So at the same time,
Caveat warning.
At the same time, the default network gets strengthened when you're in a meditative state. Literally, your gray matter thickens.
Oh, that's not where I was going.
Where were you going? Please.
Okay. Judah and I have slightly different approaches to, well, actually a lot of things, but meditation in particular. I'm the ruthlessly pragmatic one in this duo. So the way I look at meditation is really like a toolbox or like a cheese board or something. The same way you wouldn't use a hammer or a wrench for the same purpose, the same way that personally I wouldn't recommend using metta or vipassana for the same purpose. It really is the same way when you talk about yoga. It runs the gamut from the 180 degrees Celsius Bikram rooms to the hold the mountain pose for 3 days kind of things. Meditation for me is the same way. It's a toolbox. So it really depends as to what you're going after. And you could be going for emotional healing. You could be going for internal insight. The way I tend to see it, and there's a lot of pushbacks, it's just one personal way of seeing it, from easiest to hardest is how much sedative you give your monkey mind. So TM, Transcendental Meditation, is a really nice entry point into meditation because it gives you what is direct drugs for the monkey mind, which is words. So you get a mantra to repeat. And in some traditions, it's considered sacred and personal. In some other scientific studies, it seems that pretty much any sound that you repeat can have the same effect. But you get something mental to focus on. In various traditions of Vipassana, of insight, you can focus on any object of meditation, be it a candle. Your breath is usually the most portable. For a lot of people like probably us in this room, that's the nice, dry, comfortable work of the mind. And for a lot of us, it's easier, probably most of us in Silicon Valley, it's easier to work on something like insight meditation because it's all in the mind. It's a lot easier than the messy, ugly, uncomfortable work of the heart, which is the realm of practices like metta, loving kindness, tonglen, compassion. Please don't get into tonglen until you're damn sure you're ready. You're taking on the sufferings of the rest of the world. So if you want to grow your heart, you're going to use one tool. If you want to grow your plasticity, you're going to want to grow another. The caveat I was going into is there are some forms of meditation. I personally would not recommend to beginners. Zen is a good example. People have been known to go into schizophrenic episodes on Zen retreats. How many of you have ever gone on a silent retreat? Please raise your hands. Okay. For those of you who haven't, please, 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 please consider going on one. There are very few experiences of which I would say, without the slightest second of hesitation, it's a life-changing experience. I would say that about going on a silent retreat. Those of you who have gone, has this been your experience? Please feel free to say no if not.
It's very good.
Okay. Now, that's an answer. It's really good. I hate silent retreats. But it's kind of like meditation is training for your mind. It's like going to the gym for your mind. And usually by 2/3 of the way into a meditation retreat, you are certain that you are failing, the meditation practice is failing, this whole idea is stupid, and you want to go home anyway. And there's a certain arc that you will see your own mind go through. The caveat that I was going into is that meditation can, in certain circumstances, help you through depression. It can also precipitate depression. So as with any other tool, it's useful to have good mentors, teachers, and they can be in the form of books, humans, it doesn't matter, but who can guide you along the way so you get sure that you don't get stuck into a vicious cycle that through meditation can actually worsen depression. Am I making sense? Does anyone have any questions, comments, objections, please? Yeah, meditation can, in some cases, worsen depression, especially if you're on retreat.
Yes, but it can also get you out of it.
It can also get you out of it. There's a fantastic...
If it gets you into it and then gets you out of it, that bounce is the nice result.
Well, here you're saying it's an it as if it were a single thing. It's not. You've got first a bazillion different traditions of meditation, and each experience you have it's going to be different. There is a book that I recommend very, very, very highly. It's called The Mindful Way Through Depression. It is one of the best books I've seen on those two things. But there's, if you're just starting to meditation, get out of your mind and into your life. But the classic, the favoritist, would be Wherever You Go, There You Are. And those are all really good introductions as to seeing where your mind can take you and learning to drop below the mind. Learning to, just because something is in your head doesn't mean it has any validity whatsoever. Yeah? Okay. All yours.
Okay. And so one last thing on that I was just saying is that it has been shown to increase the gray matter in your default network and increase the connections. And so what can happen is even though you may not go into a mind-wandering state of creativity while in the meditative state. When you come out, you're kind of charged and ready
Now,
to
so
be stronger with it.
talk about the gyrification, it makes you smarter.
Sorry?
Talk about the gyrification, and it makes you stronger and smarter. It increases the folds in certain parts of your gray matter, and I pronounce it gyrification, you might not.
That's what threw me off, but it doesn't matter. Go.
We have slight differences in pronunciation, as you can see. And the complexity of the folding in that part of your brain is directly related to your rapidity in processing information. So it literally can make you smarter. You're going to explain it a lot better. Go
Sound
ahead.
good. And so the more your neurons are closer to each other, the more they're wrapped around each other, the more surface area they can get into contact with, kind of the way your genes are wrapped up in a ball, the more chances there are for the new connections. So that's why it can improve what's going on. Again, your brain is structural. So as you strengthen the structure of your brain, you strengthen your ability to have these breakthroughs. And so while meditation is ordinarily not an access point, it's a strengthening point. So it's a plasticity strengthening point. The access points are things like taking naps. Salvador Dali discovered the power of the hypnagogic state when you're just falling asleep and you're in that liminal in-between space. And other people have discovered the hypnopompic, which is when you're just coming out of it. You know, when somebody says sleep on it, that's a real thing. Because when you go to sleep, your default network starts working on things, and right as you're waking up, it tends to tell you things. And so in the book, we talk about Adam Shire, who's one of the co-founders of Siri. And this is just a general practice of his. He goes to sleep, focuses on an idea, a specific problem he has, and that's using his executive to say, this is what we're working on. And then he just allows his default network to do its thing at night. And then when he wakes up, he kind of checks in. He's like, what did it tell me? And it usually told him something. He writes it down. He then gets up, goes to his desk, goes back to his executive network, and starts working it out. And you see this happen all the time. Einstein famously went to his friend one day after 10 years in 1905 working on his theories about light and simultaneity and time. He's like, you know what, I give up, I'm done. And he went home and he went to sleep and he wakes up and voila. He comes back to see his friend. He's like, I have it, thank you so much. But here's the thing about breakthroughs. That wasn't it. He then spends 6 weeks with his executive function writing it all out, getting it all straight. So there's this constant back and forth. There's this interplay between the two that is so important. And so when you access this mode, you have to also remember to use your executive to focus you on the issue at hand. To say, okay, this is what I want to think about. This is what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go take a walk. Now I'm going to go take a nap. Now I'm going to go for a swim. Now I'm just going to sit in this hammock and let myself just sort of wander off. I'm going to pick up this book, but I'm not going to be focused on like finishing the chapter. I'm just going to let myself read the book and see if I kind of wander off. See if something just comes out of it. Or if you're very good at meditating, sit down for a 10, 20, 30-minute sit. And then when you come out of it, say, I now want to think about this. Go for a walk, because you've just sort of done an awesome workout for your default network, and it's sort of primed and ready to go. And then you have to let go and let it sort of do its thing. One of the issues with accessing it is because of the world we live in. We live in a world where we are on task all the time. And one of the interesting things is Douglas Rushkoff, an author, has this fascinating concept where he said, we have all this technology, all these machines, and yet we're busier than ever. Weren't they supposed to make our lives easier? Why is this? And his theory is that we have internalized machine time. We actually operate at the pace and rate of the machines that are supposed to be helping us. And so we answer emails at all times of the night. We answer phone calls whenever. We're on constantly. And the problem with being on constantly is you never access your default mode. You never access the genius lounge, and therefore you never give yourself the chance to have the brilliant ideas, to have the great breakthrough. The interesting thing is that to have a true breakthrough, we need to pull back and step into human time. We need to slow down. We need to allow that pace to happen. We operate better when we do that. We just forget, get overwhelmed, and then go, 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 go. And it's not helpful. So part of the challenge with accessing this is allowing yourself to slow down, is allowing yourself to re-enter human time, to do things like walk and nap and rest. Awe. The experience of awe is a wonderful way to access your network. You just look up at a picture like this and the sheer immensity of it all and how small we are, and we're aware of something larger than ourselves. And the research shows we we open up into a whole different space. And we open up our brains into a whole different space, and different connections occur. Different parts of our brain start talking, and we're open to this. And this also makes us slow down. You ever see anybody just like running along the rim of the Grand Canyon? When you come upon something that produces awe, you slow down. When you walk up to a redwood, you slow down. And you just kind of sit there and say, my God. You don't even have to believe in God. And that kind of comes out of your mouth. Because we're just aware of this larger entity in the universe. And so go and look out. Even just looking out across the bay will do this. Or look out at the ocean. Or go up to the top of Mount Tam and just look. The grand vistas will ignite this in us. Will bring it out of us. I want to talk a little bit about constraints and the concept of wabi-sabi, because constraints can be incredibly helpful when it comes to accessing this sort of breakthrough ability. Wabi-sabi is this Japanese design concept where you start with the flaw. The flaw is your 0 point, and you integrate it. The flaw is not to be gotten rid of. The flaw is not a problem. The flaw actually directs the way in which you're going to design. And I love what street artists do with this stuff. Right? So a crack in the wall becomes Spider-Man's web. And a railing becomes fun for Calvin and Hobbes. And this guy's breaking out of jail. And this one, they've turned the breaking down of the plaster on the outside wall into a factory. And it's the smoke coming out of the smokestack. This kid's having a good time. And here we've got camels making their way in a caravan. And all of this is from they saw a flaw, something was wrong, and then they used that to define how they were going to create the art. And so the question becomes, what's the flaw in your system? What's your biggest obstacle? If you start from that point and not say, how do I get rid of it? But say, how is this my start point? It creates all kinds of creative abilities, creative capacities. The flaw acts as sort of the access point into your default network. And so one way you can do this, and you can do this with teams as well, is you build a constraint box. And we found this to be really useful. We did this with Genentech a little bit ago, and it was very helpful because they were talking about how annoying the federal regulations were. So we spun it around, and we were like, well, let's talk about what are the constraints. And what you do is you start to lay out the constraints, right? Dave is a serious problem for me. So is the FDA. So is the cash flow. And it's really not sexy what we're talking about. It's going to be hard to get anybody interested in it. So these are some of your constraints, and you just get a sense of them. You lay them out so they don't get overwhelming. The next thing you do is you start talking about your assumptions, because very often you're assuming things that aren't right, that aren't true. And if you don't write them down and look at them, they're just going to stymie you the whole way. So no one's going to listen. Angela hates this idea. 18 months to see results, it's cost prohibitive. You just lay it all out there. You look at it and you question all these assumptions. Are they really constraints? Or are they just things that you've assumed? They're conversations you haven't had. And the reason you do it in this form is because what happens in the end is this becomes your solution space. You've now defined where you can be free. You've defined the space where your default network can now try any number of things. So as opposed to these things hemming you in and locking you in, they turn around and free you. Because now you know that you don't have to bother looking at those things. You don't have to bother beating your head against them. And now you've got this space that's opened up. And that freedom is what allows the default network to start to truly function. And so especially when you do this with a team, it's amazing what comes out and why you start finding out that there are all these assumptions on the table that have stopped people from getting interested in things that weren't even correct in the first place. And little by little, people start to realize, oh, but you know what we can do? Oh, you know what we can do? And once you're in that space, now your default network is live and functioning. And so this is one of the ways that constraints can act as a really powerful tool to get you into this. Roman Mars of 99% Invisible, a really fun podcast, he has a great TED Talk talking about flags. And he's like, you should be able to draw your flag on a 3x5 note card. And everybody thinks it's ridiculous and crazy, but he's like, that's one of the best constraints you can have because it's going to drive you to making a really excellent flag. And you can use that kind of constraint on anything. Can you express it in a 3x5 note card? Well, then you probably don't understand it well enough. Yes?
Why do you call it the default network?
Why do I call it the default network? I don't, I'm quoting. When you're on task and doing something, it goes more quiet. When you're off task, your brain defaults to this network. Okay. This is where it goes every time. So that's why it's called the default mode network. And one of the funny pieces is that the person who discovered it, Dr. Marcus Raichle, How'd I do? Okay, we'll leave it alone. The way he figured it out was he was noticing that when he had people in fMRIs and told them to just hang on a second, just wait, don't think about anything, we have to do something over here, all of a sudden all this activity showed up in their brains. And everyone was like, oh, it's just static, it's just noise, whatever. And then one day, he walks out of a meeting, he's wandering down a hall, and it just showed up. The idea showed up. So what happened was he was thinking about this, and then when he was off task, wandering down a hall, his default network, the brain defaulted to it, and then it gave him an answer to a question he'd been asking, which is, what's up with all this noise in the fMRI?
What has been?
Yes. It's because it's this place where all these different pieces are coming together and talking to each other.
Yeah.
And right, and they're just sort of putting things together. So we've discovered it truly is the engine of our creativity. That's what we've been starting to find out. And so these are all just ways you can actually get into it and use it. Focus yourself on it. One of the things, and we talked about this a lot in the beginning of the book, can we give a kitchen recipe for this? Can we say 1 cup of butter, 2 eggs, some sugar, some chocolate chips, voila, you'll have a breakthrough? And the answer is no. It's a non-linear process. It's an emergent process. And so you have to give yourself time with it. But what we're teaching you is that you can actually set conditions to make it far more likely that it will happen. Switching, I want to make a slight switch now to associative thinking, which in the end is truly what your default network is doing. And so I'm going to show you something that will both raise your plasticity, but also kind of get into associative thinking. Somebody left their GoPro on the ground, and a squirrel picked it up. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I've never seen anything like that. That is literally a squirrel's eye view of the world. And so it does a couple of things. One, it forces this growth of plasticity because you're like, oh my God, it's this big and it's moving on branches you could never move on, and it's moving so quickly through the tree. I used to move through trees very slowly, and all of this is new and new and new. And then at the same time, it adds to this piece that we call associative thinking. So with all the media about artificial intelligence and how it's going to replace human beings and yada, 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 most people who are aware know that there's this big leap between where AI is at the moment, which is amazingly good at the pattern recognition and the data crunching, and the intuitive inferential leaps between ideas. And that's something that human beings are still particularly good at. And it's the association of the different ideas, what's sometimes known as abductive reasoning, to have a little bit of data here and then to get a whole theory out of it here. And this is what the default mode network gives us. It is what takes different pieces of data and puts them together into whole new conceptions, whole new theories. And so having experiences that are completely different, this gets at the hobby idea, brings in the ability to create these associations you might not ordinarily see. So in the same way in the 1970s, California, there was a huge drought. People drained their swimming pools. They just looked like empty holes, but a bunch of kids were like, these are skate parks. Right? That's something that comes up from the default mode network. Or the skateboarding kid who wants to be able to keep practicing in winter, so he creates a snowboard and invents snowboarding. Or the Army has got Lexan, a hard plastic that is used in the windshields of their helicopters. And these windshields are getting scratched up like nobody's business in the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan and in the training at Fort Irwin in California. And they're spending tens of millions of dollars replacing these Lexan, very scratchable windshields. And lo and behold, there are these two Army National Reserve Guardmen who are helicopter mechanics and NASCAR fans. And like, well, NASCAR uses the same Lexan on their windshields, but they put these thin Mylar sheets on top of them before every race. They're called tearaways. And at the end of the race, they pull them off. The Mylar took all the hits and scratches, and the windshield's fine. Like, why don't we just put them on the Army helicopters? They took it from one place, moved it to another. They associated it, saved the Army tens of millions of dollars because the windshield's lifespan doubled and tripled. But it was already there. They associated it. They moved it to another realm. And very often, this is how we end up seeing innovation happen. How many of you know of Thomas Edison's electric pen? Exactly. He's not very proud of it either. Wasn't very successful. Ended up in the window of a pawn shop, downtown New York. Who should be walking by but this guy, Samuel O'Reilly. Samuel O'Reilly takes a look at it, and he's a pretty clever guy. And he's like, I think I could change this around. Samuel O'Reilly invents modern tattooing by changing the electric pen. Moving things in their context, from one context to another, is very often where these innovative ideas come from. It's the association, and it's your default network that's making those associations, that's connecting, that's inferring, that's intuiting between vastly different things. So there was a young meteorologist whose name I wrote down. I can't remember. It's over here somewhere. I'll get it at the end. But he's up in the Arctic in the early 1900s. And something just strikes him that the ice kind of looks like jigsaw puzzle pieces. And that's it. He just notices that. It's like interesting to him. A year later, he's looking at a globe. He's like, the continents kind of look like jigsaw pieces. I wonder if they were ever together. And he goes and he checks out the rocks along South America and along Africa, and he checks out some of the flora and fauna, and he's like, I think these things drifted. He invented the concept of continental drift, which eventually took us to plate tectonics. A meteorologist making a breakthrough in geology because of an association he made by looking at the ice in the Arctic. This is very often how it works, this idea of curiosity, of noticing the way different things come together. And it's the default network. It's mindlessly staring out at the ice and being like, they look like jigsaw puzzles. And then mindlessly staring at a globe and being like, oh, the jigsaw puzzles kind of remind me of the continents. This is where these things come together, and that's why I'm saying it's important to allow ourselves to be off task, because we don't allow ourselves to access the network otherwise. So I want you to imagine that gravity stops working at 10 p.m. and then starts working again at 7 a.m. How is our entire culture different? Start throwing things out, whatever you can come up with. Are there nets over every house? Are houses designed more like boats where everything is locked down? Are children sort of tied to their beds before 7 p.m.? How do teenagers play around with this? How do they rebel given this? How do they get in trouble given this? How do people throw nighttime parties? What does Burning Man look like? You can just keep asking yourself this over and over again. And it seems silly, but really it's coming out of the tradition of thought experiments, which Einstein uses. Right? Just playing out what is possible in the universe, what might occur. And one last one I'll show you at the very end is, so this, this is the world's most boring video unless you put this music over it. Now all of a sudden there's tension. And you're probably wondering, did I put a shark fin in? Is it gonna pop up? Are you gonna see that fin come up? Right? Or is it just the mouth gonna pop up? I don't have those skills. This is just like the world's most boring clouds out the window of an airplane. But we put the music on, and suddenly your brain's creating a whole universe. You can do this with any movie scene in the universe. All right, I'll end the tension. You can literally take any movie scene you want, add music to it, and watch how it changes. Watch what happens. I had one group where somebody shouted out, last scene of Casablanca, and somebody shouted out, We Are the Champions by Queen. And they thought they had me. They thought they nailed me. And I was a little nervous. I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. So we go to YouTube. We bring up the Casablanca, put it on mute. We bring up We Are the Champions, turn it on, start the two of them. We start watching. And it's shocking how it starts to line up. And as the plane starts to take off and Ilsa's being taken away, the music is crescendoing and Freddie Mercury's going, We are the champ. And you're like, oh my God, it's so moving. And it's totally random. And play this game. Literally play this game. And it sounds silly, but it's amazing how it sets you up for then being able to connect two things you ordinarily would never think would work. And that's where those breakthroughs come from. So there's play involved, there's a craft involved, there's practice involved. There are these tools, but it's not something in theory, it's something you do. It's a way you are in the world. And so you have the ability, you have the brain for this, you have all the parts for it. Everybody does. We just have to use them, practice with them, and get comfortable with them. And that's That's why we wrote the book. See, that's nicer. Thank you, everybody.